Some days slip by unnoticed, yet with the first light of morning, everything can shift forever. The 28th of November became one of those rare moments. No alarm sounded and no dramatic headlines surfaced, just a brief 16-word announcement from Buckingham Palace, delivered in a silence that felt almost eerie. Still, those 16 words cut deeper than any weapon, formally extinguishing 4 years of anticipation and uncertainty about the future of the Duchess of Sussex. Why today? Why at this precise moment? Ice. What really unfolded inside the so-called White Room of Clarence House? What could have pushed King Charles, a father once eager to mend old wounds, to close the final door with his own hands? And what warning did Princess Catherine sense? A danger the world seemed far too distracted to notice. Welcome to today's special briefing. Before we peel back the layers of this dramatic fictional royal scenario, don't forget to hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you won't miss any of the hidden twists waiting behind these palace walls. There are moments in time that seem ordinary until they're behind us, and only then do we understand everything has shifted beyond return. The 28th of November became one of those moments. It didn't open with chaos. No gunshots shattered the calm. No convoys thundered down darkened roads. No urgent headlines blazed across the giant screens in Times Square. No, it started with quiet, a cold, unnerving quiet that wrapped itself around the old stone ramparts of Windsor Castle. As the morning fog still clung to the River Thames, a choice was reached within those frigid stone corridors that had endured a millennium. It was a choice that would shape far more than the destiny of a single individual. It would redraw the contours of an entire institution. 16 words. Only 16 words in an internal memo, yet their impact was powerful enough to shatter every lingering hope of reconciliation that had survived across 4 relentless years. To truly understand the full force behind the decree issued on November 28th, we can't simply stare at a static document. We have to travel back, way back, and slip into the guarded thoughts of those who steer the monarchy's destiny, because the first fractures didn't explode across front pages or blare through news alerts. They started as muted, measured exhales in cold, gold-trimmed chambers, places where tension swells long before the world is aware anything is breaking. From the outside, we tend to imagine the British royal family as a cozy household full of warm tea gatherings and children running through sunlit gardens. But here's the truth. Stripped of all sentiment, it is an institution. The world's oldest family-operated enterprise, driven not by affection, but by endurance and legacy. And its ironclad principle can be distilled into a single word: stability. Anything that endangers that stability, whether a looming force from beyond or a relative carrying the royal bloodline, must be dealt with swiftly. For 4 long, unforgiving years, after the seismic Megxit of 2020, King Charles III has existed inside a merciless contradiction, a private battle almost no one outside the palace walls can truly grasp. On one side, he is a father, an aging man still shadowed by the unhealed wounds surrounding Diana's fate, and tormented by the possibility that history could once again circle back toward his younger son, Harry. The father within him never stopped leaving that door cracked open, even the smallest sliver clinging to the faint, flickering hope that on some future Christmas morning, his wandering son might finally walk through it again. He once trusted that family bonds would outlast pride, yet on the opposite end of the scale stood the monarch, the steward of a lineage that had survived a millennium. His role permitted no softness. He was obligated to shield the crown's dignity from the gathering tempests poised to swallow it whole. At first, Charles leaned on the time-tested tactic of his mother, Queen Elizabeth's silence. He placed his confidence in the slow, deliberate patience that had defined her reign. He convinced himself that if the palace stayed still, refused to engage, refused to trade blows with accusations aired on Netflix or printed in memoirs, then the fury brewing across the Atlantic would eventually suffocate on its own. He believed that the quiet strength of restraint would outlast the chaos of headlines. But Charles, for all his experience, miscalculated the battlefield. In the digital era, silence is no longer a shield, it's a vacuum waiting to be filled. It was read as a confession, or worse, a mark of vulnerability. The palace's quiet did not quell the fire, it carved out a vast emptiness instead. And Harry and Meghan stepped in to fill it with their own story. Day by day, the smoke refused to dissipate, it spread, casting a shadow over the legacy of an entire dynasty. By 2023 and into the early months of 2024, the conflict had escalated far beyond a mere father-son dispute or a rivalry between two brothers. It had morphed into a structural malignancy. And this was precisely what the late Queen Elizabeth, whose foresight often outpaced her era, had cautioned about during the Sandringham summit. Though few heeded her words at the time, one cannot be a daughter-in-law of 100 households halfway. One cannot enjoy the privileges of a royal title while simultaneously acting independently, navigating freely, and profiting under the ruthless dictates of Hollywood. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had created intentionally, or not, a perilous gray zone the monarchy had never encountered before. Consider the paradox: Meghan no longer carried out royal duties, no longer acted on behalf of the king, and no longer received any funding from the public purse. Yet each time she appeared on a red carpet, signed a multi-million-dollar endorsement deal, or spoke on American politics or sensitive social causes, the title Duchess of Sussex still shone prominently beside her name. The world found itself tangled in a labyrinth of uncertainty. Foreign diplomats broke into cold sweats when the Sussexes arrived. In a nation, should they be treated as ordinary citizens or as royalty? If the reception was too lavish, would it anger King Charles? If it was too restrained, would it be interpreted as an affront to their British titles? Major charitable organizations faced the same dilemma. Would collaborating with the Sussex Foundation be read as taking sides in an unspoken battle against Buckingham Palace? This ambiguity acted like a potent acid. It didn't topple the monarchy in a single strike, it slowly, relentlessly ate away at its foundation. It weakened the royal brand, transforming centuries of solemn tradition into a spectacle for public consumption. The blurred boundary between duty and personal gain erased the very line the monarchy had defended for generations. And the first person to recognize the true danger wasn't the king still caught between duty and emotion, nor the aging advisors clinging to their old ways. That person was a woman who had always lingered quietly in the background, watching with the keen eyes of a future Queen Princess Catherine. She understood that the so-called gray zone was far more than a mere nuisance. It was a threat to the very existence of the monarchy. If the public could no longer tell which voice spoke for the royal family and which voice belonged to an entertainment figure wielding a title, the sanctity of the institution was at serious risk. And it was from Catherine's icy strategic clarity that the first wheels of the November 28th verdict began to turn. If King Charles is the monarchy's bleeding heart perpetually caught between love and duty, then Catherine, the Princess of Wales, is the sharp, calculating mind of the modern Windsor era. To the world, she appears as a flawless image, a devoted mother, a poised style icon, her serene smile never faltering. But never let that gentle exterior fool you. Beneath the velvet gowns, the silk fabrics, and those perfectly composed waves lies the razor-sharp mind of a future queen, a woman who knows the rules of survival better than anyone. Catherine is far more than a figurehead of the royal family. She is a meticulous strategist and unwavering observer, and it was this precise, almost surgical awareness that set in motion the turning point we confront today. The story leads us back to a bleak spring morning at Kensington Palace. Inside her private study, lined with black and white photographs chronicling centuries of royal history, Catherine sat absorbed in an internal report. The room was hushed, disturbed only by the faint rustle of turning pages. This was no tabloid fantasy. It was a stark clinical dossier from Cross Atlantic, a respected independent research unit specializing in social psychological analysis. Catherine paused on page 12. Her eyes narrowed. There was something in those figures that sent a shiver down her spine. The report laid bare a stark reality. 59% of the British public believed Meghan should be completely severed from the royal family. A staggering figure, one that spoke of deep-seated resentment. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, 47% of Americans over 50, the demographic most capable of shaping public opinion, thought the palace had been excessively harsh and unjust toward the Duchess. To an ordinary observer, these numbers might simply reflect love and disdain, but to Catherine, armed with her political acumen, they exposed a geopolitical fault line. She recognized that a modern monarchy survives only when its story is unified. The crown's influence depends on being a shared symbol. Yet now the world was divided. Observing the same events, the British public perceived betrayal, while Americans saw victims of a rigid, oppressive system. Two conflicting realities existed side by side, and it was the very ambiguity, the patient silence of King Charles, that had inadvertently nourished both. The palace's indecision had created a vacuum, one that each side quickly filled with its own version of events, undermining the unity of the Commonwealth. Catherine closed the dossier and rested her hand on the polished oak table. She understood that the true danger did not come from Harry or Meghan, but from the royal family's own uncertainty. If no action was taken, this divide could calcify into something permanent. That concern shadowed her for months, until it finally manifested in a pivotal moment during the height of summer at Sandringham. Sandringham was drenched in golden sunlight that day, yet the air inside the family's private dining room felt oppressively heavy. It was one of those rare, intimate lunches with the senior royals, and it was here that Catherine observed a chilling shift in her husband, Prince William. For the past 3 years, any mention of the Sussex name would ignite William's anger. His face would flush, his tone sharpened, carrying the raw frustration of an older brother who felt deeply betrayed. But today something was different. William sat perfectly still, composed in every sense. No agitation, no furrowed brows. The anger, the raw, unmistakably human emotion, had vanished. In its place was a chilling calm, the kind that arises only from complete, calculated reason. Catherine observed her husband exchange a brief, loaded glance with King Charles. It was the look of two men bearing the weight of an entire lineage on their shoulders. And in a single suspended moment, when the soft clink of silverware against porcelain finally ceased, William leaned toward his father. His voice dropped to an almost imperceptible whisper. Yet it cut through every lingering hesitation in the room. "Father, we cannot allow the crown to be held hostage by this ambiguity for even one more day." It was not a complaint. It was an ultimatum. William had recognized what his father, blinded by affection, had refused to see. Anger can still be salvaged because anger means someone still cares. Before we explore the political earthquake looming ahead, I want to know your thoughts. Do you support William's firm, no-nonsense decision? If you do, type 1 in the comments. If you're not entirely convinced, type 0. Enjoy the video and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. But the coldness in William that day marked a kind of emotional death. He no longer saw Harry as a younger brother in need of guidance, but as a governance risk that required careful management. He was prepared to play the villain in the eyes of some, if that was what it took to protect the throne that his son George would one day inherit. That was the moment the balance of power began to tilt. King Charles, the most patient man in Britain, looked into his eldest son's eyes and confronted a painful truth. The bridge he had spent 4 years trying to build had already crumbled at its foundation. It was no longer safe for anyone to cross that line. William's unwavering resolve and Catherine's razor-sharp foresight merged into an unstoppable force, setting the wheel of history in motion toward November 28th. The era of patient silence had ended. This was the moment for decisive action. And that action demanded a plan, one conceived not from anger, but from cold, calculated reasoning, within one of the most discreet rooms in all of Britain. Everything began quietly, just as the harshest truths often do. Not with screaming headlines, not with ringing alarms, but with a chilling stillness that draped itself over the ancient towers of Windsor at dawn on November 28th. As the morning mist clung to the surface of the Thames, a cold resolve had already taken hold within those 1,000-year-old walls. There were no hurried footsteps, no anxious whispers, only a single decisive choice being made in absolute silence. A decision of just 16 words, yet it bore the weight of a historical verdict, one that would forever reshape the fate of the Duchess of Sussex. To grasp today's outcome, we must trace back to the first cracks not splashed across headlines, but lodged in the minds of those who steer the monarchy. We often romanticize the British royal family as simply a family, but in truth, it is an institution. And the fundamental rule of survival for any institution is stability. For 4 long years following the explosive Megxit of 2020, King Charles lived trapped in a painful paradox. On one side was the heart of a father, endlessly hoping to leave the door open for his younger son's return. On the other side was the duty of a king, a man bound to safeguard the sanctity of the crown against the storms threatening to engulf it. He chose silence. He believed time would mend all wounds. He believed that if the royal family neither reacted nor retaliated, the flames of anger across the Atlantic would eventually burn themselves out. But Charles was mistaken. Silence did not put out the flames, it only let the smoke spread further. By 2023 and into the early months of 2024, a structural problem had emerged. One cannot be a public figure, a former royal, and simultaneously operate under the ruthless rules of Hollywood. Meghan Markle had inadvertently stepped into a perilous gray zone. She no longer performed royal duties, no longer acted on behalf of the king. But with every step she took, every commercial deal she signed, every political or social statement she made, the label Duchess of Sussex remained firmly attached. The world began to falter in confusion. Diplomats hesitated, unsure how to respond. Charities grew uneasy. This ambiguity acted like an acid, slow, silent, yet corrosive eating away at the monarchy's credibility from within. And the first person to perceive this mortal threat was not the king. It was Princess Catherine. That spring, within the walls of Kensington Palace, Catherine came across a cross-Atlantic report that made her shiver. The numbers were stark. 59% of Britons demanded a complete severance, while 47% of older Americans expressed sympathy. What unsettled Catherine was not affection or resentment, it was the divide. She realized that the ambiguity maintained by King Charles was unintentionally feeding two opposing realities, threatening to fracture the unity of the Commonwealth. The true turning point occurred during a rare summer gathering at Sandringham. Catherine witnessed a striking transformation in her husband, Prince William. He was no longer consumed by anger, because anger is rooted in emotion, and emotion can still be salvaged. In that moment, William displayed only the icy clarity of pure reason. He turned to his father and whispered a fateful line. "We cannot allow the crown to be held hostage by this ambiguity any longer." That was the instant the balance of power began to shift. King Charles began to grasp a painful truth. The bridge he had labored to build had already decayed at its foundation. The turning point came in a sealed room at Clarence House in early November, under the steady guidance of Queen Camilla. Thick folders of American media reports lay sprawled across the table papers, working overtime to rewrite history, creating the illusion that the door for their return remained open. Camilla tapped her fingers lightly on the stack and delivered the decisive line. "If we don't define their place, they will define ours." Princess Anne nodded in agreement, and William, with the precision and authority of a future king, struck out every path to reconciliation. Only one option remained final: permanent, uncompromising. A document was drafted soon after. No bitterness, no accusations, no emotion, only the terrifying clarity of cold administrative judgment. It confirmed that Meghan would never return as a working member of the royal family, no patronages, no representation, and above all, no exceptions ever. The announcement date was chosen November 28th. An ordinary day selected to deliver an extraordinary message. At 7:32 a.m., the official statement went public. In Montecito, California, where the afternoon sun was waning, Meghan felt a shock that words could scarcely capture. She had expected negotiations, conversations, or at the very least, the continuation of silence. But she had not foreseen the complete unity between Charles and William. There were no loopholes left to exploit. The dream of a half-royal, half-celebrity existence dissolved instantly on her phone screen. And as night fell, on November 28th, a harsh truth crystallized: the monarchy is not a family you can argue with and reconcile at will. It is a historical machine. King Charles may still carry the ache of a father's heart, but as a monarch, he finally found his peace. He understood that the greatest act of love in that moment was to let go, allowing each person to walk their own path with absolute clarity. The Windsor door had closed. No fanfare, no drama, just the soft click of a lock sliding firmly into place. Inside lay 1,000 years of history. Outside, a turbulent modern world. From that moment forward, they would never stand on equal ground again. The fairy tale did not end with a wedding. It ended with an administrative document signed on a fog-shrouded morning. That is the cold yet fair price of power and freedom. When night fell over London on November 28th and golden lights shimmered on the rain-slicked streets outside Buckingham Palace, a brutal truth became undeniable, clearer and colder than ever. We have spent far too long debating who was right and who was wrong, who was the victim and who the villain. But the day's announcement delivered the world an uncompromising lesson about the true nature of power. The monarchy is not a family. A family is a place where arguments erupt, tempers flare, tears are shed, and forgiveness follows in embrace. But a monarchy is a historical machine, a mechanism that has endured for over 1,000 years through wars, plagues, and political upheavals. Its rule is simple yet merciless. It will crush anything, be it a person, an emotion, or even blood relatives, if it threatens to disrupt the smooth operation of its centuries-old machinery. When King Charles III placed his pen on that decision, he likely felt the soul-wrenching anguish of a father. Yet in that moment, Charles the father had to step aside so that Charles the king could step forward. He discovered a painful kind of peace. He understood that the greatest act of love was no longer attempting to salvage a relationship that had already decayed beyond repair. It was letting go. Letting go to protect the crown. And letting go so that those who chose to walk away could finally confront the reality of the path they had chosen. For Harry, this was no longer about anger or defiance. It was the moment of complete resignation. As he read those cold, unyielding lines, he had to accept that the gap between him and his brother William was no longer a fissure that late-night conversations or messages could mend. It had become an ocean. William was no longer simply Will's, the older brother who once chased him through the gardens of Kensington. William had become the embodiment of the institution, the towering watchtower Harry could never scale again. And for Meghan, and for all of us who have witnessed this long-running drama, November 28th leaves a stark lesson about the cost of freedom. Freedom is always a luxury, one that carries an exorbitant price. Meghan longed for freedom. She sought to escape the gilded cage to have a voice of her own. And on this day, the royal family granted her absolute freedom, the freedom of someone who is now unmistakably a complete outsider. It was a cold kind of freedom, the kind that arrives when every tie to power, legacy, and royal patronage has been severed. She had won her battle for independence, yet lost the one thing that once made the world pause before judging her the mystique of royalty. The Windsor door had closed. Listen closely. This was no slammed door of a teenage quarrel. There was no drama, no tears. Only the dry, quiet click of a brass bolt sliding firmly into place, a small sound resonating all the way to the edge of history. Behind that door lies eternity, tradition, ritual, and a legacy that will endure with or without them. Outside that door lies the clamorous modern world, Hollywood commercial deals, and the fleeting glare of fame. From this moment forward, those two worlds will coexist, but they will never intersect. They will never stand on equal ground again. The modern story of the Prince and Cinderella did not conclude with a fairy tale wedding and the words happily ever after. It concluded with an administrative document on a bleak, fog-shrouded morning. And perhaps that is the starkest, most unvarnished truth of all. The Windsor door had officially closed not with a furious slam, but with the cold, resolute click of history. From that moment forward, the fate of those standing outside that door would no longer be determined by the royal family, but by their own choices. The tale of the prince and Cinderella did not end with a fairy tale wedding. It ended with a brutal administrative document on a fog-soaked morning. Now the judgment is yours. In your view, was this move by King Charles the cruelty of a father, or the necessary clarity of a monarch protecting his throne? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you can follow us into the next confidential dossier. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.